Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone, in from out of the drizzle, a little bit of drizzle.
Where are you? Hey! I got one too. Oh my goodness.
Nice.
Sorry, I have to tell everybody about this. I probably have said it already. So, this is Philip Mandal, wonderful person. So, years ago, I was walking somewhere I don't even remember, it doesn't matter, somewhere on the street, and he saw me and he asked me, how did Mahler go last, and I quote, I said, I survived. And 2 weeks passed, and then Philip comes to me and gives me my first t-shirt which said, I survived Mahler 10. Ever since, every time I conduct a Mahler symphony, I get a t-shirt. So I have many survival t-shirts, but now I show the world, since Joe is taping this. This is the newest.
Nice.
That's the man.
Nice.
I have to tell you that I'm very proud of stuff like this. Very proud. Oh yeah, this is stuff that stays with me. Probably I will still wear it in 20 years, easily. So.
Well, speaking of surviving Mahler, I have to tell you, last night my dad was here. My dad is in town from Atlanta now, and the very first Mahler symphony he saw was last year at the end of the season, and. Last year was a little bit more challenging. The symphony's a little more challenging than Mahler 1. Uh-huh. He didn't let on last year. He's not here, so I can talk about this, right? So last year we went to dinner afterwards after the symphony, and he said, I really enjoyed it. And what do you think it means? And I said, oh gosh.
Oh boy.
All right. But then last night we went out to dinner afterward, and he said, I loved it. Boy, last year it was challenging, but the first is amazing. I love Mahler. And I said, well, good. We're off to a good start then. That's good news. Only took 70 years.
God in heaven, those questions about what does it mean?
What does it mean? Mahler got him.
Well, the thing is that I hate questions like that.
Yeah. And yet you come out here with one of us before every concert. And we ask you, Carlos, what does it mean?
Yeah, but that's different. Because when somebody asks you what does it mean after they hear a concert, I always think like, okay, what did we do wrong so you are actually questioning this? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, it's kind of working here. When we come before a concert, I think, okay, you are all in for a really cool program and an interesting Mahler symphony without a doubt, so we can talk about it. And essentially, I don't think that I very often give out something, well, every time I say something that is interpretative, I say so. I say, this is actually my take on this, but I'm sure that one day somebody else will sit in this chair and will say something very different, and all of that is valid. All of it. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was a student of conducting, one of my very beloved teachers, not of conducting, it was something very technical, he once said, and I think that's very true, he said, there is not one interpretation of classical music, there are about 20, and they are all right, but there are 1,000 that are wrong. So all we do all the time is trying to not fall into that trap. But it's there.
Well, I mean, as we're talking about interpretation, let's flip this a little. Last night we started talking about the Kurt Weill. Let's jump into the Mahler first, if that's okay, since we're already talking about the Mahler. I was thinking last night about how back in February, when artistic director Johannes Moser was here, and he played the Shostakovich First Cello Concerto, and we talked about the context in which that piece was created. And after 2 nights of sitting out here, and we talked about it, and finally Johannes said, I have to tell you, I don't think context matters. I think you take the piece on its own for what it is, and I think you take it, the formal properties of it, that this piece, it speaks for itself, and I think that that's what, when music is at its best, that's what it does.
Well, no, the thing with I think context might be helpful.
Okay.
In the sense of sometimes music can be a little bit surprising. Mm-hmm. And I think in that sense, contextual information helps. Yeah. After that, I also am a very firm believer that context, such as sometimes historical context, compositional context, artistic context, is something that matters and is very important, just not for the audience. Because I believe that as an interpreter, if you even can say that, as a musician, you need to know the context. You really need to, I understand what Johannes was saying, but if I twist what he's saying, then I would say he actually means that let's get on with being emotional about music, and that's all there is. And I know Johannes, that's not how he is. No. He's a very deeply thinking musician. And I think actually context is important because you have to be informed about, isn't it wonderful when actually you talk about something and you know what you're talking about? Well, and I like that. On the other side of things, there was, he's dead by now, this absolutely one of the best conductors of mainly last century, and even in the first decade of this century, was Sergiu Celibidache, a legend. This man, he absolutely hated anything that even smells like interpretation. I mean, he actually, there is one interpretation where, there is one interview where your colleague makes that mistake. They are talking about a piece of music, and your colleagues ask, well, in your interpretation, he gets eaten alive on TV. Because, no, there is no interpretation. It's just you do what is on the page. End of story. The thing is that I understand that. However, I have to say, yes, of course you do what is on the page. Probably every soloist you will meet, every conductor you will meet, yes, but it's on the, I only do what is on the page. And I say, of course we probably all do that, but it's always through this lens, meaning it's this person who is actually making the decision, and if it's another person, it will be a different decision. And it's, in a way, when it comes, especially to music that is emotionally heavily charged, and also with music that, in cases like Mahler 1, that I have done many times in different periods of my life, everything, I am a certain person, I have a certain background, I have read stuff about the symphony that either drives me or not, and I have the experience of having it done before, and thinking what I've done probably 25 years ago with this symphony is like, oh my God, how could I have done something like that? It's art, you know. And I always say, yes, in the moment I think that the interpretation that I put in front of all of you that is what it is. Talk to me in 10 years, and I will say, no. That's why, it's one of the many reasons why I don't like to listen to my own concerts, because then I always like, if, for example, 89.9, this wonderful radio station happens to put out something that I did in concert 12 years ago, and I don't know that's me, I might say, who is that guy? Oh my God. Yeah, so interpretation.
But interpretation by the audience, you say, it's more important for musicians. Mahler, at least initially, created at least a part of a program for this symphony. He took it back. He said, this is what this is about. No, well, but this is kind of what it's about. But now I want you to interpret what this means. He even gave it a name, the Titan, which he then said, never mind, I'm taking that away.
So I thought about the title, the Titan, because I actually know that the Titan is linked to a German writer. And so I thought myself, and I'm talking 25, 30 years ago,
Sure.
Do I have to read that writer? And I said, oh no, never mind.
Do you think he did? Do you think he read the book?
Well,
Maybe read in it.
Mahler for sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Jean-Paul was very popular at that time. Very, very popular writer at that time. But I don't think he's not even a popular writer in German language nowadays. One of, I mean, I'm sure he was a fantastic writer. But the question is, do you need to know all of that? And I don't. I think you need to know something, and the point is, just to continue a little bit the thread that Johannes put out in front of us of maybe no context and maybe raw emotion. The music of Mahler is very emotional at all times. There is a lot of emotionality, and it's even in this symphony. This is the first symphony he writes. This is actually the first major purely orchestral piece that he writes. I mean, I think that, and this is part of context in a way, we have gotten kind of, we accept in concert halls nowadays things and don't think about how did the composer get to this solution? And what I mean by that is, we just take, oh, it's Mahler 1. It's probably going to be emotional, it's going to be of a certain length, it's going to be loud in part, and it's going to be maybe, because that's what we hear Mahler is, slightly neurotic. All of this is true. However, it's sometimes interesting to remember what did the music do at the time when it was written to an audience, and what drives a composer to actually even attempt to do something like that. So this symphony was written during a time in which the greatest symphonist at that time was actually Johannes Brahms. And Brahms wrote only 4, unfortunately, and the music of Brahms is always kind of formally and also harmonically, it's always slightly backwards looking, always honoring traditions. And Mahler, with his first symphony, breaks out of that to an extent that is incredible if you look at what was possible back then. Now we live in a time, we are 130 years later. And now we know that Mahler wrote actually 9.5 symphonies and the Song of the Earth and a couple of songs, etc. And we know now that Mahler goes with his symphonies. It's very normal to find a symphony by Mahler that lasts an hour and 15, an hour and 25 minutes. And also we also know that Mahler tends to get very dark and very tragic, and that he obsesses with a lot of things like the military and death as an idea. But at the time when the symphony was written, none of that was even, nobody knew. I mean, there comes this Gustav Mahler, very famous as a conductor, writes a symphony, is not successful with this piece. There is even one review of, I think it was the premiere, which talks about, and I quote, "Well, as always with great conductors, they seem not to be great composers," and Mahler is exactly that. Ouch. And he revisited this symphony at least 4 times before it acquired the form that we have. And Brandi already said it. This is in itself the story of a struggle, of a man with a very high artistic vision who literally attempts to pack the entire world into a symphony, which is pretty much impossible. But he tries, and to a certain extent, later in life he succeeds. And in this symphony, it's just, I think it's a fascinating piece of music, and I'm very happy that we're doing it. I just associate this symphony only in part with what Mahler does later so well, which is the struggle of the single individual against all odds of life, and eventually later symphonies of Mahler giving up. Life is too hard, let's die. Very happy composer. And in this symphony, that happens essentially only in the last movement. There is this battle against everything, and there is the triumph of the Titan. We win. But there are 3 other movements, and they are very different from each other. And the first movement, I love the first movement, and I think I don't know whether it's the most difficult to either do or even to understand, because what for me is the challenge in the first movement is it gets fairly immobile, the music. It's just, the way it starts is very slow, and it takes a while, and then after a while you hear this wonderful song, which is a song that Mahler himself wrote, and then it gets very energetic, and then comes the entire middle section, and that is, for me, the most stunning moments of the first movement are exactly there, because it is this sense of being in nature, and this is already an interpretation, it's really warm outside or hot, and you sometimes when you look into the distance and it's very hot, you see the air doing this, and I think you hear that in the music, and you are kind of married to nature at that time, and you breathe through the nature in the first movement, and you wait until something happens, and it builds, and it builds, and you know something comes, and then it explodes, and surprise, surprise, it really explodes, and there is happiness unheard of Mahler. It's fab. I adore that. And second movement,
Also joyful. The second movement, very joyful. This folk song, and very familiar. And
there he taps into his very Austrian roots. So when the piece was first presented to the public, the movement that made the most controversial reaction was the third, because you have to just understand that, first of all, to write a funeral march in a symphony hasn't been done much at that time. Beethoven wrote one, but that's pretty much it in terms of the high art of symphony. And Mahler writes, and Mahler does something which is very strange. He utilizes one of, here in America, I say that because I see that all the time. I assume one of the nursery songs we all know very well, probably for the last 60 years, well, maybe not 60 years, something like this. The wheels on the bows go round and round, Okay, in Germany and in France there is Frère Jacques, dormez-vous, etc., etc. He utilizes that and turns it into a funeral march. So people were like, what? And then he writes music into the funeral march that creates a parody of the funeral march. And it's actually, people simply couldn't handle that. That's what essentially the third movement is about. And then comes the music with the struggle, and at the end we stand tall and triumph, and everybody's happy.
You alluded to it last night, but we didn't really talk about this. One of the big changes that he made was that this symphony originally had 5 movements. There was a middle movement,
Yes.
Blumen, that
Yep.
I believe has been published as a standalone piece. Why did he decide to take it out?
I actually didn't read why, but
Sorry.
but I think he probably saw that it's just too much.
Okay.
It's
Mahler saw that something was too much and decided to take it out?
I mean, he was a fairly younger man at that time when he writes this one. And he didn't have the experience, and he tried something very new, and the symphony by itself, this one, is still anywhere in the range between 57 and 62 minutes long. This is a major attempt to write something symphonic. So, and if you add another movement, it adds 10 minutes. Come on. People would have had a really difficult time with that alone.
Yeah. You mentioned how young he was when he wrote this. Robert McBride, also of All Classical, mentioned today, and it hadn't occurred to me, both of the composers on tonight's program died when they were 50 years old. Neither of them had terribly long lives, and neither of them had terribly long composing lives.
Well, that is, it's one of the, this is one of the facts of life that we always struggle when it comes to, I think, to any art form, and maybe not only to art form. I mean, you know, even when it happens in our own families that somebody has to go, before its time, meaning if somebody dies in their 30s and 40s, you think, way too early, why, etc. And in art, I mean, one of the games that you can play with your mind, if you want, is what would have Mozart written if he wouldn't have died at age 36? Or Schubert in his 30s? Or Mahler, age 50? Kurt Weill. I mean, unfortunately, the list of composers that we play very regularly that got really old is not very long. Saint-Saëns, Verdi got to be old. There are a few. Ray Vaughan Williams we play, yes, he got old. But others, Mendelssohn, God in heaven, such a talent, died. And yes, Kurt Weill died too. Kurt Weill's life was very, very interesting because he had early in his life in Germany a very strong association with this fantastic writer Bertolt Brecht, and they collaborated many times. And then, of course, the Nazis came, and Bertolt Brecht, being far left in his beliefs as politics, had to leave really quickly, and Kurt Weill, being Jewish, had to leave. And Kurt Weill went to Paris and was very well received, and he got a commission to write the piece you're going to hear tonight, The Seven Deadly Sins. And first he actually went to Jean Cocteau and asked him whether he wanted to do it. Yes. And Cocteau said no.
Would have been a very different piece.
Very. And then he went to Bertolt Brecht, and Bertolt Brecht was happy to collaborate. Essentially, after the premiere was done, to very mild acclaim, to say it diplomatically, mocked the piece. He said, oh yeah, that little thing, ugh. But Bertolt Brecht is actually responsible for turning this piece into something American of sorts. And this is way before Kurt Weill actually came to the United States, and it taps also into places, geographical places that Bertolt Brecht had no idea. I mean, never visited, didn't probably know much. So The Seven Deadly Sins is about a very young woman, Anna, who has two sides, Anna 1 and Anna 2. And Anna 1 is kind of always collected, always thinking ahead, really has a plan, where Anna 2 just goes with the flow and goes with emotion. And they are from Louisiana. And they have a family that is waiting for them. The family is those 4 guys you are going to see here on this side.
Hudson Shad.
Yes, fantastic. And she goes and visits 7 cities on her trip that lasts 7 years. And her aim is to collect enough money in the cities in order to build a little house in Louisiana. And in each city, she gets confronted or slides into one deadly sin. And it's not that Anna actually decides, I have to do this in order to get the money. Just some of these things just happens. Pride happens because she's being asked to striptease, which she's too proud for. Well, gluttony, yes, she's being asked to simply not eat because they don't want to promote hippopotamus in Philadelphia. No, it's Baltimore. No, Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. That's Philadelphia. And so on and so on. But lust, you think, well, let's go after. Well, it just happens because Anna, she falls in love with the wrong man, of course, it's life. And finally she returns after 7 years, and you hear actually that she has to pay a price for these 7 years in committing 7 or being exposed to 7 deadly sins. One little thing about the music that I wanted to tell you, this is before the years of Broadway of Kurt Weill. So it's more German cabaret music meets the idea of opera, meets the idea of ballet. And one thing that is astounding, this is already an interpretation, is the music for the fact how the words work is, and how Weill usually writes, is a little more mellow. And it lasts until the last sin, movement 8. Until you hear something very stubbornly Germanic. Mm-hmm. I mean, where you kind of hear stomping soldiers, if you want, this kind of very organized Deutsch, which has nothing to do with the sin that happens there. But if you wish to make a little mind game, if you hear this piece, not tonight just expose yourself to what you're going to hear and see, but if you hear this piece over and over, look out for certain allusions, because there are, while being a German composer, it's not possible not to be influenced by great composers so you hear a little bit where you think, wait a second, 30 years, 40, 50 years, I heard Bruckner writing something that reminds me of that, and it's all true, it's all there. So I think it's a great, great piece of music, and of course, we have our very, very own Storm. She will rock the house. She's fantastic. I love the juxtaposition of these 2 pieces also together. You're in for a real treat. Carlos, thank you for a wonderful 2018-2019 season that we're closing this weekend. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Brandi Parisi. Carlos Kalmar. I'm Brandi Parisi from All Classical. A quick note, these concerts will be broadcast June 20th. You can learn more at allclassical.org. Thank you all for coming early tonight. Enjoy the concert.